So we're getting to our second Elul Shabbos. And this Shabbos is Parshas Kiseitze. And there's a nuance in Parshas Kiseitze that's very important and relevant for us. Let's dive into the Parsha a little bit and discover how many questions there are just getting started in the Parsha. And then I think by asking those questions, we're going to find an approach that we can take with us from the Shiur. So there's a fascinating, and without knowing the Parsha well, somewhat disturbing mitzvah in the beginning of Parshas Kiseitze that describes an allowance that's made for a Jewish soldier. War is a very, very destabilizing, difficult event for a soldier, and it could affect him very, very deeply. You don't have to look far. Even today, the soldiers that are fighting in Eretz Yisrael and anyone that's fought in a war, would tell you about the unbelievable psychological and emotional weight that war causes. And seemingly with that in mind, the Torah tells us that if a soldier sees on the battlefield a woman that he wants to marry, he wants to take home with him, even though usually we wouldn't suggest that he do that with a non-Jewish woman, but in this case there's a certain unique seder of bringing her home and being Megayer her, and a very, very unique parsha of making her his wife. And this is a fascinating parsha because of what Rashi tells us, and Rashi's quoting the Medrash. Rashi tells us that, of course, again, as I'm saying it, I recognize that we have to understand this. This is not simple. But Rashi says that, of course, HaKadosh Baruch Hu really didn't want to say that it's permitted to take a wife that you find on the battlefield. Of course, that's not optimal. But lo dibra Torah ela keneged Yetzer Hara. The Torah was speaking, keeping in mind the power of the Yetzer Hara. In other words, that when a person's in war, he's in a very, very compromised situation, and maybe he doesn't have the strength to be able to live and to carry on in the way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would want. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu allowed him this certain seder, this system of taking this woman in light of the fact that the Yetzer Hara, when someone is in the middle of fighting a war, is very, very, very difficult, and it's a very difficult situation. Now, this is something that is very difficult to understand because we're not talking about some self-help guide or some governmental laws. We're talking about Hashem. And if Hashem wanted us to withstand those tests, He can give us the strength to do so. So why does Hashem, instead of giving us the strength to withstand tests, He says, look, you're not going to, this is a tough thing for you, and I understand that it's tough. I'm going to make an allowance. It doesn't sound like the hashkafa of the Torah that we're familiar with. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gets what He wants. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu created a world that reflects what He wants. And if Hashem doesn't want us to do it, Hashem could have created a world where we can withstand that pressure. The idea, if you're a teacher in school, you could say, like, a child is very challenged, I'll let them get off the hook on this test, or these questions on the test. Or an employer could see that a certain employee is struggling with a certain thing, and he can make an allowance because that person is struggling. Hashem doesn't have to do that. Hashem could just change the facts on the ground, so that we don't have these struggles. And it seems that it was important in the Torah that there be a parsha that addresses this vulnerability and this weakness, that Hashem doesn't want it, but yet it's overpowering, and what should we do about it? Furthermore, which makes it even more mysterious is that after the psukim that describe this unique marriage off the battlefield, the pasuk describes a person that has a ben sayer umayra. A ben sayer umayra is a rebellious son who fulfills certain specific criteria that are mentioned in the psukim and elaborated on in the Gemara. And a person, a child who's a ben sayer umayra, if a person has these simanim, these indications, it's an indication that he will not be successful, this child, in serving Hashem properly. There's a chiyuv misa on this child, and the parents have to participate in bringing him to Bezdin. A unbelievably tragic and difficult episode. And Chazal tell us that if a person wants to have a ben sayer umayra, they should marry the woman off the battlefield. In other words, that one leads to the other. So I ask myself, if HaKadosh Baruch Hu saw that the Jewish soldier can't withstand this, and therefore he permitted it, why does it lead to a ben sayer umayra? And if it leads to a ben sayer umayra, so why doesn't Hashem help us to withstand the temptation? Something feels here like it needs a little bit of explanation. Okay, layer number one. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Okay, let's go to layer number two. Layer number two is that this whole story with the battlefield and all of that, the Mefarshim say, and the Medrash says, that it's really all a mashal to an internal war. That the pasuk, although on the surface it seems that the pasuk is talking about an actual war, but it's referring, these midrashim and mefarshim explain, to an internal battle. And that's the battle that all of us are in the middle of, as kol zman she'haneshama b'kirbi, as long as we're alive, we're in this war. And that's the war that we wage with our Yetzer Hara, with the midas, with the attributes, with the temptations, with the distractions that attempt to pull us away from serving Hashem. Okay, so let me ask you, if this going to war is going to war with the Yetzer Hara, so who's the beautiful woman? So Chazal say the beautiful woman is the neshama of the person. Is that a person goes to war with his Yetzer Hara, and when he successfully battles his Yetzer Hara, he discovers within him something stunning, something beautiful, something shining, and that's his pure neshama that he discovers inside of him. And the Torah says, take her, connect with her, marry her, reconnect with your neshama. Such a unbelievably beautiful medrash overlaid over such a disturbing parsha. But I have two problems with this. I know it's beautiful, but I still have two problems with it. Problem number one is that I don't see the connection between the simple reading of the psukim and the midrashic reading of the psukim. And certainly in Hashem's Torah, we can expect and search for and yearn for a sense of wholeness, that all the parts that make up this parsha fit together. And I don't know how these two issues, the soldier permitted to marry the non-Jewish woman, and the Jew discovering his neshama in his battle with his Yetzer Hara, I don't know how those two things fit together. And second of all, the war here, Rashi says that this war, when the Jewish people go to war, there's two kinds of war. It's two kinds of war. One type of war is a war that the Torah tells us to engage in, like the war against Amalek. That's not a war that we make a decision about. It's a war that we fight because we are messengers, we are soldiers of Hashem, and Hashem has told us to fight this war. There's another kind of war, that the war against Amalek and similar types of wars is called a milchemes mitzvah. It's a war that's a mitzvah. But there's another kind of war, and that's a war where Hashem didn't tell us to fight this war, But the king, the Sanhedrin, the leaders of Klal Yisrael understand that it's the right thing to fight this war. And on their own, they make this call, this decision, that it's necessary for the sovereignty and the safety of the Jewish people to wage this war. It's called a Milchemes Rishus. It's a war where they're choosing to do that. Hashem didn't command it, but they're making a educated decision to engage in this war. Which type of war are we talking about here? Which type of war are we talking about? So Rashi says we're talking about a war of choice, not a war that's a mitzvah. And that also seems to be very difficult to understand. If this war is the mashal to the war of through which we discover our neshama, would you call that a mitzvah or a voluntary? I think we would all call that a mitzvah, a milchemes mitzvah. So if the war that the pasuk is describing, where this person sees this woman on the battlefield and he takes her home, is a war of choice, isn't it an interesting choice to have a mashal that war represents the war with the Yetzer Hara? When the Yetzer Hara attacks, that's a war of choice or it's a war of mitzvah? It's certainly a mitzvah. So what's going on here? So I want to explain what's happening here. It's beautiful and wonderful if we can get clarity in Parshas Ki Seitzei, but I think it's also important to understand, so we should have clarity in what our job is right now. Some practical clarity. You know, this month of Elul, this month of doing tshuva, you know, our children are going to go back to Yeshiva Katana, you know, in a few days, and the moras are going to start teaching about that if someone does an aveira, they do tshuva, and certainly that's true. And I'm thrilled that they're going to be teaching our children and our grandchildren, you know, those mitzvahs. But us, we've matured since those days of preschool. And I think that means that our understanding of what's happening also has to mature. Elul is not just about, I did this aveira, let me do tshuva. I did that aveira, let me do tshuva. Elul is a significantly deeper and more powerful than that. Elul is about discovering the part of me that wants to serve Hashem. It's about understanding that I came into this world to serve Hashem. It's about remembering that. You know, and as we go through our lives, there's so many things, good things and wonderful things, challenging things and distracting things, that sometimes make us forget on a day-to-day basis that we're here on a mission, that there's a purpose, that Hashem wants us here to accomplish something. And this time of year is the time, each time of year has its segula, and its job, and its avodah. And the job of this time of year is to discover that depth within us, that identity, that mission, that clarity, that I'm here on a mission. You know, you send a agent or a soldier overseas on a mission, and his general finds him 6 months later wandering around the country, partying and shopping. And he says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "It's really a beautiful country you sent me to." So the general's like, "You know, there's a reason we sent you here. You had a mission." He's like, "Oh, right, my mission." That sounds bizarre to you, right? But we're that soldier. We're sent here into this world. Hashem has a mission for us, to fill this world with knowledge of Hashem, to serve Hashem proudly, to do His mitzvahs, to live His values, to do chesed, to daven to Him, to be loyal to Him, not to question Him, to love Him, to feel His love to us. We have a mission. We have something to accomplish here. And this time of year is a time of discovering that, and that's the mashal. I'll get to the story of the battlefield in a moment, but that's really the mashal. The mashal is you go to war against your Yetzer Hara, It's not just about I spoke Lashon Hara. I forgot that time that it was Shabbos and I flipped on the light. Yes, all of those things need tshuva, certainly. For sure, it's urgent, extremely important. But all of it is attached to a deeper thing. And that deeper thing is, I am on a mission. I came into this world for a reason. There's something I need to accomplish here. A mother that spends time raising her children and educating them and so on, even in that role, that's such a holy, holy, precious role. But even that role, we can get distracted in that role. We can forget sometimes that we're here to teach Yiras Shamayim to our children. We're here that it's important that our children see us davening. It's important that our children notice our loyalty to Hashem.
1 minute. 1 minute.
Somebody is not muted. If somebody... It's important that we realize that raising our children, which is such an unbelievable joy with all the challenges that come with it, but this joy of raising children, that there's a mission here. We want these children to end up being servants of Hashem. And when a mother gets her children ready for Yantif, and the children come to shul, and we see them coming to shul dressed up in their Yantif clothes and their matching clothing and all of that, that mother has so much power at her disposal. Her children are picking up what's important to her. Is the Yantif important to her? Is the Simcha important to her? Or is the matching clothing important to her? What's important? What's important by the Yantif Suda? Is the family spending time together singing songs to Hashem? Or is it that this week's magazine had an even fancier dish, a recipe to an even fancier dish, and I drove everyone crazy until I got those bizarre ingredients and I made that dish? How am I filling my home? How am I educating the people around me? How am I influencing the world? And there's just so much power that each person has to bring knowledge of Hashem and closeness to Hashem into this world. And that's what according to the Medrash, that's what the Pasuk is describing. We're all in a war with our Yetzer Hara. But the job is, it's not just, did I do that wrong? Oh, I won't do that wrong again. We start with, no, 1 second, did I forget my mission? I'm here for something. Hashem had a reason that He put me here. Hashem wanted me to be here because I bring something to this world that nobody else could bring. Anybody that struggles with a low self-esteem or that beats themselves up has to stop right now and ask themselves, if I'm so small, why did Hashem send me here? Hashem, each Yid that's here in this world has a mission that Hashem charged them with. And if you're still alive, and I'm assuming that everyone I'm speaking to is still alive. If you're still alive, that means Hashem still has a mission for you. And you still have a job to do. You're important to Hashem. And you have a job to do. And there's something you can accomplish here. There's something that you bring into this world. Hashem chose you to bring something into V'ra'isa Bashivya. You see in what was captured by the Yetzer Hara a beautiful, shining, yearning neshama. You find that something inside you that awakens and yes, Hashem sent me here for a reason. I want to do that job that Hashem sent me here for. I want to come home full. I want my shopping bags to be full when I come back to Hashem. That's the mashal. But you know something? Sometimes it's easier to serve Hashem when Hashem said, do this. It's Rosh Hashanah, listen to the shofar. Okay, got that. Daven, don't drive on Shabbos. Whatever the mitzvahs are. Light candles before Shabbos. in a sense, that has a certain ease to it just because it's structured. We know exactly what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to do, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us the ability to do those things, to keep those halachas. Where it becomes more powerful in terms of discovering my mission is the areas that there is no specific se'if in Shulchan Aruch. The areas where there's no specific halacha, where you call the Rav and the Rav says, I'm sorry, but this is something you're going to have to figure out yourself. This is something you're going to have to understand. What does Hashem want from me? Should I take this job? How should I handle this child? What should I do about this Shalom Bayis challenge? My husband doesn't go to Minyan. Am I supposed to support that, or am I supposed to criticize that? My children seem to be struggling. Am I supposed to just keep a happy home, or should I be sitting down with my child? Those things, it's very hard to find in the Torah specific se'ifim for that. I'll never forget that time when I was in 8th grade, and I went over to my Rebbe, and I said to him that I wanted could he just direct me to a sefer that will just tell me, like I was 13 years old, just bar mitzvahed, that will just tell me how I'm supposed to serve Hashem. Like I wanted a specific, like I wanted direct instructions. And he smiled, and he said to me, there is no sefer in the world that's going to say how Yossi Sonnenschein should live his life. You follow Shulchan Aruch, you try to learn Musar, but you have to find your own journey. You have to make your way. That's the beauty of each unique person in this world. V'ra'isa b'shivya eishes yefas Torah, to find that beautiful neshama, and to use it to understand what my mission is and what my goal is. And that's what it means when it says, B'milchemes harishus hakasav medaber. We're talking about a war of choice. What that means is, yes, of course, the war with the Yetzer Hara is a war of mitzvahs and averos, but it's also a war of trying to figure out what Hashem wants when there's no specific mitzvah. Like that king and Sanhedrin that has to decide, should we go to war or shouldn't we go to war? And they ask the Av Bezdin of the Sanhedrin, and he says, I'm sorry, there's no place in the Torah that it says whether or not you should go to war. You have to balance in your mind, what does Hashem want from us now? You have to have a sense of it. You have to try to think of what Hashem entrusted us with, and what's the situation of Klal Yisrael, and what's the threat, and what's the reason, and what's the possible loss of life, and what's the possible gain, and you have to make a call based on your sense of what Hashem wants. That's a Milchemes Harishus. And I think that that's what happened to this guy that goes out to war. Of course, Hashem could do the easy thing and just give us the ability. No more temptations. Hashem could do that. But Hashem did something else. Hashem said, look, this is a very, very strong Yetzer Hara. I'm not going to tell you it's usher. But I am going to tell you I don't like it. And I want you to work on yourself. That you don't come to that. And I want you to make this your mission, to try to grow until this is not what you're doing. Not because it's a mitzvah or avera, but just because you know that it's not what I want. A child, this happens all the time. Kids will ask the person taking care of them, or their teacher, or their parent, can I
have an ice?
Can I, what?
Have an ice. Ices.
Can I have an ISIS? So the parent will say, I really would rather you didn't have one. So a lot of times the kid will respond, but could I? Because you didn't say no.
Right.
Or I don't like when you guys eat so much ISIS.
At 8 o'clock in the morning.
Okay? But the kid will respond, but could I? Because the child is young and not mature yet, and in his mind, or her mind, I don't really care if you like it or you don't like it. I know I like it. I just want to know if I'm allowed to do it. And many people serve Hashem like that child. They okay, it says you're not allowed to turn on a light on Shabbos. I know that's a no. Okay, I got that. Non-kosher food is a no. I got that. But this way of dressing, this way of talking, this way of educating, this way of relating, can I do that? Well, there's no place in Shulchan Aruch where it says it. Okay, so could I do it? No, our job is to have a sense of what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. Our job is to learn, to absorb what our mission is, what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. Milchemes HaRishus. It's not necessarily always black and white. And that's where the action is in tshuva. The action is to be able to have our own inner guide. And if you are facing an Elul and thinking about this Elul and Yomim Naraim, that means that Hashem is entrusting you, not just with the ability to do mitzvahs and to do tshuva for the mistakes that we made. Hashem is trusting you to understand His will. Unbelievable. Hashem is saying, you are special. I trust you. I have a mission for you, and we don't have a Navi Bizman Hazeh. So who's going to tell us what our mission is? What's the answer? We are. We have to think and understand and clarify and remember and reveal and inspire and pray and work until we can feel comfortable. This is what I was meant to do. This is what I'm here to do, to take care of these people, to give this tzedakah, to stand up for these important values, to sacrifice things because the other things are more important, to be gentle and kind and loving, but strong and stubborn when the need arises. All of that ability to discover our mashal. So that young soldier goes out into war, and he sees that woman at war, and Hashem says, look, I'm not saying no, but I'm just saying not good. I don't like when you do that. And if the soldier says, but could I? Yeah, I guess you could. But is that what Hashem wants? Is this soldier fulfilling his mission? Is he doing the tafkid that he came into this world for? He is not, and that will come out in his children. He'll have that Ben Sayur Umayra. He's not staying attached to his mission. And that's why Hashem transformed this mitzvah from a milchemes mitzvah, from a command, into, I want you to figure this out. I want you to work on it. I want you to build your inner world until you're ready to live in a way that reflects our mission. This is our job in the days ahead, to try to discover or rediscover our sense of passion and clarity for our mission. The Torah, according to Chazal, describes that part of our neshama as an Isha Yefas Torah, as a beautiful woman. Why? Because it's a beautiful part of us. It's the part of us that reflects the will of Hashem. Could there be in this world anything more beautiful than the part of us that reflects the will of Hashem? Yashikayach.